On the day of my husband's funeral, my own adopted son whispered in my ear, "You killed him, you cow. You deserve to be used up until you die." In that moment, I knew I was living with someone who could hurt me at any time. Hello there, my dear friends. It's so wonderful to have you all here with me today. You can call me Ethel Jenkins. I'm 73 years old, and I was born in Lexington, Kentucky. Today, I live in another town, much more beautiful, which I'll tell you all about soon. Some folks know me as Miss Ethel from the park because every day, weather permitting, I sit on the bench in Washington Square Park to feed the birds and chat with whoever happens to be around. This morning, I woke up early, made myself a strong cup of coffee, just the way we Southerners like it, and decided to record this video for you all. I'm here in my little living room. Look around, the walls covered with wooden carvings I've made over the years. That one there, a wooden coffee mug with a spoon, was the first one I made. It's over 30 years old now. I took a piece of oak that fell after a storm and transformed it into art. And over in the corner, that carving of the bird family, remember? I made that in 1994, when it snowed so much that the pine trees were all white, and I was stuck at home for weeks. Wood carving, oh, this art came into my life as a blessing. I started working with wood after a very difficult time, you know? It was my therapy, my refuge. My first piece was a small wooden spoon, all crooked and awkward, but it was the beginning of my healing. Then came birds, local animals, scenes of country life, and now I even make large pieces that I sell at the local crafts fair. My house now is small, but to me it's a palace. I have my little bedroom with a window that looks out to the backyard, where I planted a peach tree that gives fruit so sweet it tastes like honey. In the kitchen, I have my wood stove that I use in winter to make hot cider and keep the house cozy when that bitter cold hits that only we folks from the Appalachian region really understand. And you, my dear friends watching me now, tell me in the comments, which town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with coffee, after lunch, or at night when the kids have gone to bed? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take time out of your day to listen to this old grandma's stories. Let me know, okay? Let's create a chain of kindness. Today, I want to share a very painful story with you, but one that needs to be told. A story about hope, disillusionment, and new beginnings. About how a family dream can turn into a nightmare. It's not easy to relive certain memories, but perhaps my experience can help someone going through the same thing. You know, life doesn't always follow the path we plan. Since I was little, I dreamed of having a house full of children, hearing laughter running through the hallways, teaching them to make homemade bread and jam. But God had other plans for me, and this journey took me down paths I never imagined I would travel. As I prepare another cup of coffee, I'm going back in time to when I was just a girl running through the fields of Lexington with no idea what life had in store for me. I was born in 1952 in a simple house in the East End neighborhood of Lexington. My father, Walter Jenkins, worked at the Woodford Reserve Distillery, tending to the grounds. He was a tall man with calloused hands and an easy smile, even after a full day under the sun. My mother, Elizabeth, was a seamstress. She spent her days bent over the Singer machine she'd received as a wedding gift. How proud she was of that machine. She said it was what saved us from hunger during hard times. There were 3 of us siblings, me in the middle and my 2 brothers. The eldest, Edward, was always the family protector, serious and responsible from a young age. The youngest, Isaac, was the mischievous one, always getting into trouble, but with such a good heart that nobody could stay mad at him for long. Our house was small, wooden, with a wood stove that stayed lit all day during winter. The floor was wide planks that creaked when we walked on them, and on the walls my mother hung plaster saints that she painted herself. In the backyard, we had a large vegetable garden and some chickens. My father also planted peaches, apples, and blackberries. Oh, how delicious those fresh blackberries were, picked right off the bush, and how I loved helping my mother make blackberry jam, apple butter, and preserves for winter. The routine was always the same. wake up with the first rooster crow, have breakfast with grits and fresh milk. Then, while my father went to the distillery and my mother sewed, we children helped with chores before going to school. I swept the yard, fed the chickens, and helped wash clothes in the stone wash basin. The water was so cold in winter that my fingers would turn purple, but we didn't even complain. That was just how life was for everyone we knew. The school was almost an hour's walk away. We walked together, all three of us, along a dirt road that cut through cornfields. Along the way, we'd meet other farmers' children, Justine Montgomery, the twins Roy and Rudy Thompson, Irene Zakowski. We'd play hide and seek among the cornstalks, tag in the fields, ring around the rosy during recess. The teacher, Miss Claudia, was strict but fair. When someone didn't know the lesson, they'd stay after school, writing on the blackboard. The town festivals were the most anticipated moments. The Harvest Festival, of course, was the most important. Everyone would dress up, women in their best dresses, men in suits and ties despite the heat. There was a procession with the Virgin Mary, music with Otto Malone's band, and plenty of good food. My mother always made a fried chicken that everyone praised, and my father brought his best homemade bourbon. Then there was dancing, and we children would peek at the couples dancing until we fell asleep. In winter, the nights were for gathering, meetings at neighbors' houses to tell stories, play cards, and eat roasted chestnuts on the stoveplate. The men would drink whiskey to warm up, the women would knit, and we children would listen to ghost stories that made us sleep huddled together in fear. It was during one of those winter gatherings, when I was about 10 years old, that I first heard the story of Aunt Henrietta, who could never have children and ended up dying alone. The women spoke softly, thinking we couldn't hear, but I heard when Mrs. Isabella said, "Poor Henrietta, withered like a flower without water, without a child to care for her in old age." That kept hammering in my little head. What if I couldn't have children either? Would I be sad and lonely like Aunt Henrietta? At school, when the teacher asked what we wanted to be when we grew up, the other girls would say, "Teacher, nurse," but I always answered, "I want to be a mother." The teacher would laugh and say that wasn't a profession, but to me, it was the most important dream. At 12, I had my first period. My mother explained that now I could have children, but only after marriage, of course. "It's a blessing from God," she would say. "A woman's greatest joy is to create life." I would imagine what it would be like to have a baby in my arms, to breastfeed, to see the first steps, to teach the first words. What I didn't know was that my body was hiding a secret that I would only discover years later, something that would completely change the course of my life. The pains I felt, so strong they made me lie down curled up for days, weren't normal as my mother thought. "That's just how it is, sweetheart. Every woman goes through it," she would say, while giving me chamomile tea to ease the pain. But it wasn't just how it was. It was the first sign that my dream of being a mother would be much harder than I imagined. In those days of innocence, running through the fields with braided hair and a dress sewn by my mother, I couldn't have imagined the trials life had in store for me, nor how my desire to mother would be tested in ways no girl should have to face. It was at 18 that I met James Riley. He had come from Frankfurt to work at the General Electric plant in Lexington. We met at a barn dance at the Lutheran community. I wasn't even Lutheran, but my friends invited me, and I went along. He was there with some cousins, a tall guy with broad shoulders and a quiet manner. When he asked me to dance, I felt that flutter in my stomach that Mom always said I'd feel when I met the right man. James wasn't a man of many words, but he had eyes that spoke for him, brown eyes, deep, that looked at me as if I were the only woman in the world. We started dating in secret, because my father didn't want me getting involved with someone from outside our Baptist community. "These outsiders don't have the same respect for family," he would say. But James quickly won my father over with his hard-working and honest ways. We dated for 2 years and married in 1972 in a simple ceremony at First Baptist Church. I was 20, he was 24. We moved into a small rented house in the Southland neighborhood near the factory where he worked. I got a job as a clerk at Myers department store downtown. We were young, hard-working, and full of dreams. The biggest one, of course, was having children. We started trying right away. Month after month, I anxiously waited for a delay that never came. The pains during my period continued to be terrible, sometimes leaving me bedridden for days. James was worried. "Let's go to the doctor, Ethel. This isn't normal," he insisted. But in those days, a woman only went to the doctor as a last resort. I was embarrassed to talk about these things. After a year of trying unsuccessfully, I finally worked up the courage and went to see Dr. Lawrence at the Good Samaritan Hospital. He examined me, asked questions that made me blush with shame, and ordered some tests. When I returned for the results, his expression already told me everything. "Mrs. Riley, you have a condition called severe endometriosis. It's when the tissue that lines the uterus grows outside of it. In your case, it's already very advanced and has affected your fallopian tubes. Unfortunately, it will be very difficult, almost impossible, for you to get pregnant naturally." I left the office in a state of shock. I walked through the downtown streets without seeing where I was going, tears blurring my vision. How could I tell James? How could I tell the man I loved that I couldn't give him the children we had dreamed of so much? I sat on a bench in Gratz Park and cried until I had no more tears. An elderly lady sat down beside me and put her hand on my shoulder. "Courage, my child. God never gives us a burden greater than we can bear." At that moment, those words brought me no comfort at all. When I got home, James was waiting for me, anxious. One look at my tear-swollen face was enough for him to understand that the news wasn't good. I told him everything, sobbing, expecting to see disappointment in his eyes. But what I saw was only love and concern. He hugged me tight and said, "Ethel, I married you, not the possibility of having children. We'll get through this together." And we did, for a time. We tried treatments, new doctors, even faith healers, and old wives' remedies that the old ladies in town recommended. Nothing worked. The years went by and the wound became a scar. It hurt, but it no longer bled like before. We focused on work, on the trips we took to the beach in summer, on the nieces and nephews who came to spend time with us. It was actually my sister Marion, who worked as a social worker, who first suggested adoption. She knew cases of children who needed a home because of her work. "You have so much love to give. Why not consider it?" she asked during a Sunday lunch in 1980. James and I looked at each other. We had never seriously talked about it. That night, lying in bed, we started talking about the possibility. "It would be like winning the lottery," said James, hugging me. "A son or daughter to call our own." I fell asleep that night dreaming of a smiling little face calling me Mom. But the path to adoption proved much harder than we imagined. In 1981, we started the process. Marion helped us with the paperwork, social studies, interviews. The bureaucracy seemed endless. We visited orphanages, met children, fell in love with several of them, but there was always some impediment. Either they were groups of siblings who couldn't be separated, or they had relatives who still maintained custody even without the means to raise them. It was 4 years of waiting, frustration, and renewed hope. 4 years of preparing a room that remained empty, of buying clothes that stayed in drawers, of dreaming of a child's voice that didn't come. James began to lose heart. "Maybe it's not meant to be, Ethel," he would say. But I refused to give up. Something inside me said that I was born to be a mother, one way or another. And then, on a gray Wednesday in June 1985, the phone rang. It was Marion, her voice trembling with emotion. "Ethel, pack your bags and come to Louisville tomorrow morning. There's a boy, 5 years old, just entered the system. His mother passed away, father unknown, no relatives. I talked to the judge. He knows you from the previous process. There's a real chance." We barely slept that night. Before dawn, we took the bus to Louisville, hearts racing. At the state shelter, an old, poorly maintained building downtown, we met Benjamin. a skinny little boy with big frightened eyes, brown hair cut close to his head. When they introduced us, he stood still, holding a plastic car with broken wheels, without saying a word. "He's in shock," the social worker explained. "His mother died 2 weeks ago from pneumonia. He was alone in the apartment with her when it happened. Stayed there for 2 days until a neighbor noticed." My heart tightened, imagining that child's suffering. At that moment, I knew I would do anything to protect him, to give him all the love that his short life had already denied him. The first meetings were difficult. Benjamin hardly spoke, didn't smile, wouldn't let us touch him. We went to the shelter every day, bringing small gifts, a new car, a storybook, a little wool sweater that I knitted myself in the colors of the Wildcats. The team we discovered was his favorite. Gradually, a first timid smile, a whispered question, a look that no longer avoided ours. After 3 months of visits, studies, and more paperwork, the day finally came to bring Benjamin home. We prepared his room with a new bed, a bookshelf full of children's books, a carpet with a car track design. My brother Isaac and my sister-in-law Sophia had a welcome barbecue on Sunday, with the whole family gathered to meet the newest member of the Riley family. Benjamin was scared with so many people, so much attention. He clung to me the whole time, hiding his face in my skirt when someone tried to talk to him. He only agreed to sit on James's lap when he promised to show his collection of miniature cars afterward. It was the beginning of a special connection between the two. The first months were about adaptation. Benjamin had frequent nightmares, waking up screaming in the middle of the night. Sometimes he had inexplicable fits of anger, breaking toys or refusing to eat. The court psychologist, Dr. Nancy, advised us, "It's normal. He's testing boundaries, seeing if you'll abandon him like he feels he was abandoned before." Despite the difficulties, there were also moments of pure joy. The first time he called me Mom while I was treating a scraped knee. The first time he slept through the night without nightmares. The day he came home from school with a drawing of 3 people holding hands. "That's you, that's Dad, and that's me," he explained proudly. James devoted himself to the boy with a love that moved me. He taught him to fish at Uncle's pond, to play ball in the neighborhood field, to recognize birds by their song. Gradually, Benjamin transformed into a happy, energetic child. At school, he excelled in math and drawing. At home, he was loving and well-mannered, always ready to help with chores. "We did the right thing," James would tell me at night as we watched the boy sleeping. "He's our son, Ethel, just as much as if he had come from your womb." I agreed, my heart overflowing with gratitude and love. My dream of being a mother had been realized in a different way, but no less profound. What I didn't know was that this sweet-eyed boy harbored much deeper wounds than we imagined. Wounds that time would not heal, but would transform into something dark and dangerous that would one day threaten to destroy everything we had built with so much love. The years passed, and our Benjamin grew up. When he turned 12, in 1992, we began to notice changes in his behavior. At first, we thought it was just his age, that difficult phase all parents dread. He started becoming more closed off, locking himself in his room, listening to loud music, responding rudely when we asked about school. "It's normal, Ethel," James would say. I was like that at his age, too. Boy stuff, it'll pass. But something told me it wasn't just that. His look had changed, become harder, more defiant. At school, his grades, which had always been good, started to fall. I received the first call from the principal, Mrs. Stella, when he was caught smoking in the bathroom with other boys. "He's keeping bad company," the principal warned. "Mitch Oliver and those boys from the East End, they have a history of petty theft and vandalism." I went home with a heavy heart. How could I tell James, who always defended his son? When I finally worked up the courage and showed him the note from school, his reaction surprised me. Instead of concern, I saw almost a pride in my husband's eyes. "The boy's becoming a man, Ethel. He can't be raised like a saint. Let him experience the world, learn to defend himself." That was our first serious argument about raising Benjamin. I insisted he needed limits, supervision. James argued that he was just giving wings to his son. He was raised without a father, without a male role model. Now he needs to learn to be a man, he repeated, as if that justified everything. The situation worsened when Benjamin entered high school. There were days when he didn't even come home after school. He'd arrive late at night, sometimes smelling of alcohol. When I complained, he completely ignored me or said things like, "You don't tell me what to do. You're not even my real mother." Each of those words was like a knife in my heart. I had dedicated my life to that boy, loved him as if he had come from my womb. And now, in adolescence, he threw in my face that we weren't a real family. The worst part was that James never supported me at these times. "He didn't mean that, Ethel. It's just his way of venting." Or, "Stop riding the boy's back. Hasn't he suffered enough before coming to us?" I started to feel increasingly alone, more isolated. My friends didn't understand what I was going through. "You're lucky you only have one," my friend Yvette would say, a mother of 4. "Imagine if you had several giving you trouble." But it wasn't just trouble that Benjamin gave. It was a constant challenge, a veiled aggression, a distancing that hurt too much. He grew increasingly closer to James and further from me. The two had secrets, man-to-man talks from which I was excluded. My husband began to give him money secretly to cover for his night outings, to make up excuses when he missed school. One night, I confronted James after Benjamin left. "You're spoiling our son. He needs boundaries, not an accomplice." My husband hit the table hard, something he had never done before. "Do you want to turn him into a girl? He's a young man. He needs to live. And you know what? He's not our son. He's my son, too. I have as much right as you to decide how to raise him." Those words opened a wound that never fully healed. For the first time, I felt that we were two different teams, James and Benjamin on one side, me alone on the other. I cried all night in the guest room. The situation at home became unbearable. Benjamin barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was with disdain. James and I hardly talked, except about practical matters. "Pay the electric bill. The car needs to go to the shop." Our home, once full of love, had been transformed into a silent battlefield. It was during this time that I met Mrs. Genevieve, an elderly lady who attended the same church as me. After Mass, I confided in her about my problems. With her wisdom from having lived a long life, she told me, "My child, sometimes we plant a rosebush expecting roses, but thorns grow. Don't let the thorns hurt you so much that you forget to care for the plant." I tried to follow this advice. I continued to care for the house, to prepare Benjamin's favorite meals, to ask about school even when he didn't answer. I sought out a psychologist, Dr. Tanya, who helped me understand that an adopted child's adolescence can be even more complex, full of questions of identity and abandonment. In 1998, when Benjamin was 18, he simply stopped going to school. He only had a few months left to graduate from high school. "I don't need that paper for anything," he said. "I'm going to work with Ted at the garage. He offered me a job." Ted was one of his older friends, owner of a mechanic's shop in the outskirts of the city. Once again, James supported the decision. "Working is important, Ethel. It'll be good for the boy. Give him responsibility." I knew it was a lost battle. If the two men of the house had decided, nothing I said would make a difference. Benjamin started spending entire days away from home. Sometimes he would stay the whole weekend without showing up, without giving any news. When he returned, he always had money in his pocket, more than he should earn at a simple garage. I began to suspect he was involved in illicit activities, perhaps drugs. I found a joint in his jacket pocket once, when I was doing laundry. When I confronted James, he shrugged. "It's just marijuana, Ethel. Every young person experiments." The truth is that my husband was afraid of losing his son. Benjamin was the center of his world, the realization of his dream of fatherhood. He preferred to turn a blind eye to the problems rather than risk a confrontation that might drive the young man away. In 2000, something happened that changed everything. Benjamin came home in the early hours, accompanied by 2 police officers. He had been caught in a bar during a fight. Someone had pulled out a gun. There were shots fired. A young man was injured. Benjamin swore he had nothing to do with it, that he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. This time, not even James could minimize the seriousness of the situation. He paid the bail, hired a lawyer, used all our savings that we had set aside for retirement. In the end, they managed to prove that Benjamin was not directly involved in the shooting, and he was released. That night changed my husband. He aged 10 years in 1 week. For the first time I saw fear in his eyes, not fear for himself, but for his son, for his future. "We need to do something, Ethel," he told me, his voice breaking. "He's losing his way." We tried everything. James found a better job for Benjamin at a reputable shipping company where a friend of ours worked. I managed to convince him to finish his studies in a night school program. For a few months, it seemed like things were improving. Benjamin was spending more time at home, being more respectful. He even helped me with some tasks, like fixing a faucet or changing a light bulb. But it was like building a sand castle at the edge of the sea. Soon new waves came, suspicious friends calling at all hours, mysterious outings, money appearing without explanation. And worst of all, Benjamin started drinking heavily, coming home staggering, sometimes aggressive. One of those nights, he pushed James when he tried to stop him from going out again. My husband, already 56 years old, fell and hit his head on the corner of the table. It wasn't serious, but the cut bled a lot. Seeing his father's blood seemed to awaken something in Benjamin. He turned pale, started crying like a child, begging for forgiveness. For a few weeks after this incident, he really seemed remorseful, determined to change. He attended Alcoholics Anonymous meetings that ran in the church parish hall, went to work every day, even started dating a decent girl, Lucy, the daughter of Mr. Norbert from the hardware store. I prayed every night that this time the change would be real, lasting. James was more worn down, more quiet. The doctors had discovered that he suffered from high blood pressure, and the medications made him drowsy without the energy he once had. It was during this time, in September 2002, that James began to feel chest pains. At first he disguised it, said it was just a pull from carrying weight at work. But one night, the pain was so strong that he fell to his knees in the kitchen, his face contorted in agony. I called an ambulance in panic. At the hospital, the diagnosis came like a punch to the stomach: lung cancer, already in an advanced stage. "How can that be, doctor?" I asked Dr. German. "He never smoked in his life." The doctor explained that it could be exposure to substances at the metalwork factory, where James had worked for decades, or simply genetics. His father had died young, also of cancer. The following months were a nightmare of hospitals, chemotherapy, radiation therapy. James withered before my eyes, losing weight, losing his hair, losing his will to live. I started sleeping at the hospital, only returning home to shower and change clothes. And Benjamin? Almost completely disappeared. He showed up at the hospital once in a while, stayed a few uncomfortable minutes by his father's bedside, and soon invented an excuse to leave. When I demanded more presence, more support, he responded with aggression. "You don't know what it's like to see him like this. I can't stand it." In fact, I knew exactly what it was like. It was me who held James's hand during the pain crises, who wiped his sweat on fever nights, who heard his laments and fears in moments of lucidity. But Benjamin could only think of his own pain, his own discomfort. The last argument we had with James, still conscious, was precisely about Benjamin. I was exhausted after 3 nights without proper sleep, and I vented, "He doesn't even come to see you, James, after everything you did for him." My husband, though weak, found the strength to reprimand me. "Don't talk like that, Ethel. He suffers in his own way. Promise me you'll take care of him when I'm no longer here." I promised, of course. What else could I do before a dying man? But inside me, a revolt was growing. Why did I have to take care of a grown man, 22 years old, who never respected me, never treated me as a mother? James passed away on a cold dawn in June 2003, while I slept in a chair next to the hospital bed. I didn't see his last breath, couldn't say goodbye. When the nurse woke me, gently touching my shoulder, he was already covered with a white sheet. The days that followed were a blur of practical arrangements, wake, funeral. Benjamin showed up at the hospital when I went to sign the papers to release the body, red-eyed, smelling of alcohol at 10 in the morning. He didn't say anything, just accompanied me in silence. At the wake, held in the chapel of the municipal cemetery, he stayed in a corner, accepting condolences with nods of his head, without shedding a tear. Several times I saw him going out to drink something in the car with friends I didn't even know. It was during the burial, when the casket was being lowered into the grave, that it happened. I was crying openly, supported by my brothers Edward and Isaac. Benjamin approached from behind, as if to give me a hug. I leaned back slightly, seeking the comfort I thought he would finally offer. That's when he whispered in my ear, so quietly that only I could hear, "You killed him, you cow. You deserve to be used up until you die." Those words froze my blood. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it, that the shock and sadness were making me hear things. But Benjamin's look, when I turned to face him, confirmed that I wasn't having delusions. There was hatred there. A visceral hatred that I had never seen before, not even in our worst arguments. My entire body froze. The people around continued throwing flowers on the coffin, giving their final goodbyes to James, but I was paralyzed, as if time had stopped. My brother Edward noticed something wrong and held my arm. "Ethel, are you okay? You're as pale as a ghost." I couldn't answer. My legs weakened, and if it weren't for my brother supporting me, I would have fallen right there over the freshly opened grave. Benjamin quickly moved away, joining a group of young men waiting near the parked cars. I noticed that he didn't look back even once. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. I vaguely remember people hugging me, saying words of comfort that couldn't penetrate the fog of terror that enveloped me. What did Benjamin mean by that? How could he blame me for his father's death? And more importantly, what did he intend to do? After the burial, my brothers insisted on taking me to Edward's house. "You can't stay alone at a time like this," argued Isaac, but I knew I needed to go home, face whatever was to come. I didn't say anything about Benjamin's threat. It seemed so surreal, so monstrous, that the words wouldn't come out. "I'm fine," I lied. "I need to organize James's things, arrange the papers. You've already done so much." Reluctantly, they left me at home in the late afternoon. Before leaving, Edward hugged me tightly. "Anything, Ethel. Anytime, just call. I'll come running." I entered the house with my heart pounding. The silence was oppressive. For the first time in 30 years, there was no James to greet me, to ask about my day, to share the dinner table. The tears came without warning, and I allowed myself the outpouring that I had contained during the funeral. I cried for hours, sitting in his favorite armchair, hugging his wool coat that still had his smell. It was already late at night when I heard the sound of keys in the door. Benjamin. I quickly wiped away my tears and became tense, alert. He entered staggering, clearly drunk. Seeing me in the living room, he paused for a moment, as if deciding what to do. Finally, without saying a word, he headed to his room and slammed the door. That night was the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made me start. I locked my bedroom door and pushed a dresser against it, an improvised barricade. By morning, when I finally left the room exhausted, Benjamin had already gone. In the days that followed, he hardly appeared at home. When he did, it was to get clean clothes or money, which I left on the table to avoid confrontations. We didn't talk, barely looked at each other. The tension was palpable, like an invisible and dangerous animal that occupied the empty spaces of the house. A week after the burial, I received a visit from Mrs. Eliza, a neighbor who lived 2 houses down from ours. She came bringing a cornbread and offering condolences. While we had coffee in the kitchen, she commented casually, "What a shame that Benjamin isn't feeling his father's absence so much. Just yesterday I saw him at Caesar's bar, playing pool and laughing loudly with that crowd, as if nothing had happened." I swallowed hard, not knowing what to respond. Mrs. Eliza continued, her voice lowering to a confidential tone. "You know, Ethel, I don't want to interfere, but I think you should be careful. I've heard things about this crowd he hangs out with. They say they're involved with hard drugs, not just marijuana, and Clayton, that big guy with the tattoo on his neck, spent 6 months in the regional prison last year." I thanked her for the warning with a nod. When she left, I sat at the kitchen table and, for the first time, allowed the idea to take shape in my mind. I was afraid of my own son. That same night, I made a decision. I called my brothers and told them everything: the threat at the cemetery, Benjamin's behavior, my growing fear. Edward was furious, wanting to immediately confront Benjamin. Isaac, always more thoughtful, suggested that I temporarily move to his house. I can't abandon my house, the house I built with so much sacrifice with James, I argued. Besides, that would be like admitting defeat. "This isn't a competition, Ethel," Isaac replied gently. "It's about your safety." In the end, we reached an agreement. My brothers would come spend a few days with me until we decided what to do. Edward, recently retired, could stay longer. Isaac would come after work and on weekends. When Benjamin arrived late that night and found my brothers in the living room, his surprise was visible. For a moment I saw something like fear in his eyes, quickly replaced by an expression of defiance. "What's this? Family meeting?" "We're here to support your mother," answered Edward, his voice firm. "She just lost her husband." Benjamin gave a dry laugh. "She's not my mother. She never was." Those words hit me like a slap. After everything, the bandages on scraped knees, the sleepless nights when he was sick, the clothes washed and ironed, the meals prepared with love, he still denied me the title I treasured most: mother. "You'd better go to your room," said Isaac, standing up. Although he was the calmest of my brothers, he was also the tallest and strongest, imposing with his almost 6'5" height. Benjamin hesitated for a moment, then shrugged and left the living room. During the week my brothers stayed with me, Benjamin practically didn't appear at home. When he came, it was always accompanied by 1 or 2 friends, never alone, as if he needed witnesses or protection. He would enter and leave quickly, taking what he needed without saying a word. I thought my brother's presence had solved the problem, at least temporarily. I was wrong. On the night they finally returned to their homes, promising to return on the weekend, the incident that changed everything happened. I was already in bed, almost falling asleep, when I heard the front door slam shut. Altered voices, loud laughter, bottles clinking. Benjamin had brought friends, probably to celebrate my newly restored solitude. I got up and put on a robe over my nightgown. I took a deep breath, gathering courage, and left the bedroom. In the living room, I found Benjamin and 3 young men I didn't know, sitting on the sofa and in the armchairs, drinking and smoking. The smell of marijuana was unmistakable. "You need to leave," I said, trying to keep my voice firm. "It's late, and this is my house." One of the young men, with bleached hair and an eyebrow piercing, looked at Benjamin with a mocking smile. "Is this the old lady you talked about? The one who thinks she's the boss of you?" Benjamin stood up, staggering slightly. His eyes were red, pupils dilated. It wasn't just alcohol, I realized with a tightness in my chest. "This house is mine too," he said, his voice slurred. "My dad left it to me too." "Actually, he didn't," I replied, surprised by my own courage. "The house is in my name. It always has been." It was true. When we bought the house in the 80s, we decided to register it only in my name to simplify inheritance issues, since James had other relatives in Frankfurt. At the time, it seemed just a bureaucratic formality. Now, it was my only protection. Benjamin's face contorted into a mask of fury. He advanced toward me, pointing his finger inches from my face. "You liar! You always wanted everything for yourself. First my dad, now the house." One of his friends, the oldest and apparently the most sober, got up and held his arm. "Easy, Benjamin. Let's get out of here." They left, dragging Benjamin, who continued shouting threats and insults. When the door slammed, my legs gave way, and I fell sitting on the floor, trembling uncontrollably. That same night, I locked all the doors and windows and called Edward. Between sobs, I told him what had happened. He arrived in less than 20 minutes, still wearing pajamas under his coat. "Enough, Ethel. Tomorrow we're going to the police station to file a complaint." The next morning, we went to the downtown precinct. The sheriff, Mr. Gilbert, a middle-aged man with a tired expression, listened to our story with attention. When I finished, he sighed deeply. "Mrs. Riley, I'll be honest. Without actual physical aggression, the most I can do is file a report for threats. And even then, being your adopted son, the situation is complicated." "But he threatened my sister with death," protested Edward, "at her husband's funeral." The sheriff rubbed his face with his hands. "Look, I'll send a patrol car to regularly pass by your street for the next few days, and I'll call the young man in for a talk, give him a scare, but I can't promise much more than that." We left the police station with a feeling of helplessness. The law that should protect me seemed tied by technicalities and bureaucracy. Edward insisted that I go to his house, but again I refused. I won't be driven out of my own house, the house I built with so much sacrifice with James. I returned home determined to resist, to not let myself be intimidated. I changed all the locks that same day. At night, Benjamin appeared and found his keys useless. He banged on the door for almost an hour, alternating between pleas and threats. I didn't answer. Eventually, he gave up. In the weeks that followed, we established a strange impasse. Benjamin would come almost daily, knock on the door, sometimes shout obscenities, other times beg to enter, claiming he had nowhere to stay. I would watch through the gap in the curtain, my heart heavy, torn between fear and a stubborn remnant of maternal love. After all, he was the boy I had raised, whom I had taught to read, to ride a bike, to make the sign of the cross before sleeping. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I opened the door when he knocked. It was raining, and Benjamin was soaked, his hair dripping over his thin, poorly shaved face. For a moment, I saw in him the 5-year-old little boy I had met at the shelter in Louisville, frightened and vulnerable. "Benjamin, why are you doing this to me?" I asked, my voice choked. "After everything we've been through together?" He looked at me, and for an instant I saw confusion in his eyes, perhaps even a flicker of remorse. But soon his face hardened again. "You always treated me like an intruder. You always preferred that I be a good, obedient little boy, while my dad accepted me as I was." "That's not true," I protested. "I just wanted the best for you. I wanted you to study, have a decent life, be happy. Is that a crime?" "You never understood me," he replied, his voice choked by the rain, or perhaps by contained emotion. "You and Dad were different. He understood me. James loved you so much that he couldn't deny you anything, even when it was for your own good," I said, feeling the tears mix with the rain coming through the open door. "But that wasn't true love, Benjamin. True love is wanting the person to grow, to develop, to be the best they can be." For a moment, something seemed to change in his look, but soon his eyes hardened again. "I need money," he said dryly, "to pay for a place to stay." I sighed, exhausted. "I'll give you money for a week at a boarding house. After that, you need to find a job, Benjamin. I can't support your unruly life." I went in to get my purse, leaving him standing at the door. When I returned with some bills, he took them quickly, without looking me in the eye. "Is this all?" he asked, counting the money. Something broke inside me at that moment. So much sacrifice, so much love to come to this. A stranger at my door, demanding money, without a hint of gratitude or affection. "It's all you'll get from me," I replied, my voice firmer. "Don't come back asking for more." I closed the door before he could respond. Through the window, I saw him walk away in the rain, shoulders hunched, his figure getting smaller until disappearing around the corner. In the weeks that followed, I lived in a constant state of alert. I installed extra locks on doors and windows. My brothers took turns spending nights with me. Sometimes, in the early hours, I would hear knocks on the door that made me freeze in fear under the blankets, but I never answered. A month after James's burial, I received a call from Sheriff Gilbert. "Mrs. Riley, we found your son last night during an operation in Palm Alley. He was involved in a delicate situation. I need you to come to the station." My heart raced. Palm Alley was known as a point for drug trafficking and prostitution on the outskirts of the city. What would Benjamin be doing there? When I arrived at the police station, the sheriff received me with a grave expression. "Mrs. Riley, your son was in possession of illegal substances, not just for personal use, but in a quantity that suggests trafficking. Additionally, he had an unregistered gun." I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. "Can I see him?" I asked in a weak voice. The sheriff hesitated. "He's agitated. I think it's better if you wait until tomorrow, when he's calmer." But I insisted, and finally, I was taken to the cell where Benjamin was detained, along with 3 other men. When he saw me through the bars, his face contorted in an expression that mixed anger and despair. "Come to see your work," he shouted, grabbing the bars. "Happy now that you've put me here?" "Benjamin, I didn't put you here," I replied, keeping my voice low. "It was your choices that brought you to this place." "You never loved me," he yelled, his face red with fury. "Never. You just pretended because you wanted to please Dad." Those words hit me like a punch in the stomach. After everything we had been through, how could he think that? But looking into his bloodshot eyes, I realized that I wasn't talking to my son. I was talking to a stranger, someone dominated by addiction and hatred. "That's not true, Benjamin," I said simply. "I loved you from the first day, and I still love you, even now." He laughed, a harsh sound without joy. "Then get me out of here. Use your savings. Sell the house if you have to, but get me out of here." I shook my head slowly. "I can't do that, son. It would be contributing to your destruction. Maybe staying here is your only chance to find a better path." "Cow!" he shouted, punching the bars so hard that his fingers bled. "You'll regret it when I get out of here." A guard approached and gently touched my shoulder. "I think it's better if you leave now, ma'am." On the way out, the sheriff informed me that Benjamin would face serious charges, which could result in several years in prison. I walked home in a state of shock, my legs moving automatically while my mind tried to process everything that had happened. That night, sitting in James's armchair, I made the hardest decision of my life. I would not attend the hearing to defend Benjamin. I would not pay for a lawyer, would not beg clemency from the judge. For the first time, he would face the consequences of his actions without me being there to cushion the fall. It was a different kind of love, harder, more painful, letting him face the reality he had created himself. Perhaps, just perhaps, prison could do what my maternal love couldn't: bring him back to sanity. 3 weeks later, I received another call from Sheriff Gilbert. "Mrs. Riley, I'm sorry to inform you." His voice hesitated. "Your son. There was an incident at the state prison where he was transferred." Time seemed to freeze. "What kind of incident?" I asked, already feeling a void opening inside me. "A fight between inmates. Your son tried to establish dominance, let's say. He challenged one of the leaders of the pavilion. He was found the next morning in his cell. He didn't survive his injuries." The words reached my ears as if they came from very far away, through a long, dark tunnel. Benjamin, dead. The boy I had held in my arms, whom I had taught to take his first steps, whom I had cradled on fever nights. Dead in a cold cell, alone, full of hatred. The second burial in less than 2 months was a small, sad ceremony. Just me, my brothers, Father Andrew, and 2 of Benjamin's former schoolmates who heard about it from the newspaper. There were no flowers covering the coffin, no emotional speeches, just the sound of wind through the cypresses and my silent tears falling on the freshly turned earth. When everyone left, I stayed a moment longer before the simple grave. "Rest in peace, my son," I whispered. "May you find in the next world the peace you couldn't find in this one." I returned home that day with a strange feeling. It wasn't relief, as some people might imagine. It was an immense emptiness, a double mourning, for the son I lost twice. Once to drugs and hatred, and again to death. But along with the emptiness, there was also a quietness that I hadn't felt in months. I entered the house, locked the door, and for the first time since James's death, I didn't need to push the dresser against it. I didn't need to check the windows 3 times before sleeping. I didn't need to sleep with the phone within reach, ready to call my brothers at the slightest suspicious noise. I sat in the silent living room, looking at the wooden sculptures on the walls, silent witnesses to so much suffering. And then, surprising myself, I took my carving knife and a piece of wood that James had saved for a future project. I began to work, my hands moving almost of their own will. When I finished, hours later, I had before me a small sculpture, a bird with open wings, ready to take flight. It was imperfect, rough in some places, but there was in it a freedom, a promise of transcendence that made me cry again. This time, not just from sadness, but also from a nascent hope. It was there, that night, that I began the long and painful process of healing. The months that followed Benjamin's death were the loneliest of my life. The house, once full of voices and footsteps, now echoed only with my movements. The neighbors, although well-intentioned, avoided mentioning the tragedy that had befallen my family. The visits became increasingly rare, as if my misfortune were contagious. It was my sister Marion who finally broke this cycle of isolation. She had been living in Aspen for years, and even though we weren't as close as my brothers and I, we always kept in touch. When she heard about what happened to Benjamin, she came to visit, bringing a basket of peaches and a tight hug that was worth more than 1,000 words of consolation. "Ethel," she told me as we drank coffee on the porch, "you can't continue here alone, ruminating on these memories. Come spend some time with me in Aspen. The air is lighter there, you'll be able to breathe again." At first, I resisted. How could I abandon the house I had built with James, the furniture we had chosen together, the garden we had planted, the walls we had painted, laughing and dreaming of the future? Every corner held a memory, and abandoning them seemed like a betrayal. "I'm not saying you should move permanently," explained Marion, with that patience that always characterized her. "Just spend some time away, clear your thoughts. This house is suffocating you, my sister. Anyone can see that." After a week of insistence from her and my brothers, I agreed. I packed a small suitcase with the essentials and left the keys with Edward, who promised to check on the house regularly. I left for Aspen on a late afternoon in October, when the last rays of sun tinged the cornfields at the sides of the road with gold. Marion's house was simple but cozy, located on a quiet little street near downtown. She had been living alone since her husband passed away 5 years earlier, and divided her time between her work as a secretary in a medical office and the crafts classes she gave to tourists. The guest room had a window that looked out onto an inner courtyard full of blue hydrangeas, and it was there that I began to rediscover the pleasure of simply being alive. In the first weeks, I hardly left the house. I spent my days helping Marion with household chores, reading books from her small library, or simply looking out the window. The nights were more difficult. Nightmares came frequently, waking me sweaty and trembling, often shouting names that during the day I tried not to pronounce. Marion never pressured me to talk about what happened. She had the gift of knowing when silence is more healing than words. But one morning, as we were having coffee, she placed a small card in front of me. "What's this?" I asked, picking up the paper. It's the address of a very special person. I'd like you to meet her. I looked suspiciously at the simple card, which read only Olga Pimentel, therapist and artisan, and an address in the Meadow Valley neighborhood. I don't need therapy, Marion. I need time. My sister smiled with that serene way of hers. Olga isn't an ordinary therapist. She works with wood, just like you. I believe you have a lot in common. Reluctantly, but unable to deny a request from my sister after so much generosity, I agreed to visit this Olga the following week. The address led to an old wooden house, painted blue, with a well-tended garden full of aromatic herbs and fruit trees. When I knocked on the door, I was greeted by a lady of about 70, gray hair pulled back in a simple bun, and eyes of such a deep blue that they seemed to see through you. "You must be Ethel," she said with an accent that mixed the southern drawl of the colonists with something else, perhaps German. "Marion told me about you. Come in, the coffee is ready." Olga wasn't a therapist in the traditional sense. She didn't make me lie on a couch or talk about my traumas. Instead, she took me to a workshop at the back of the house where I saw the most extraordinary wood carvings I had ever witnessed. There were birds so detailed they seemed about to sing, human faces expressing the whole range of emotions, and nature scenes of impressive delicacy. "You work with wood too, don't you?" she asked, observing my reaction to the pieces. "I tried," I answered honestly, "but I never managed to create anything as beautiful as this." Olga laughed, a sound as light as wind chimes. "Nobody starts by creating masterpieces, dear. Wood teaches patience above all." That afternoon, she gave me a piece of pine and a well-sharpened carving knife. "Don't think about what you want to create," she instructed. "Let the wood show you what it wants to be." I spent hours sitting in the workshop, working in silence, while Olga occupied herself with her own creations. At first, I felt clumsy, frustrated with my lack of technique. But gradually, something began to emerge under my hands, a simple, almost primitive form of a woman with arms raised to the sky. "See there," said Olga when I finished, "the wood knew what you needed to express." I began visiting Olga 3 times a week. She taught me carving techniques, how to choose the right wood for each project, how to sharpen and care for the tools. But more important than that, she taught me to use art as a form of expression for feelings that words couldn't capture. "Pain, Ethel, is like a river," she told me one day. "If you try to dam it, it eventually overflows and destroys everything around. But if you create a channel for it to flow, it can nourish gardens along the way." My sculptures became that channel. Through the wood, I expressed anger, grief, guilt, and, eventually, forgiveness. First to myself, then to Benjamin, and finally to James, for leaving us so early. It was during this period that I met August Miller, a retired carpenter who attended Olga's classes on Thursdays. He had strong, calloused hands from decades of working with wood, and a gentle smile that lit up his time-worn face. He lost his wife to cancer 10 years earlier and understood the journey of grief like no one else. We started as workshop colleagues, exchanging tips about types of wood and finishing techniques. Gradually, the friendship deepened. August invited me to see his woodshop, where he restored antique furniture. He showed me photo albums of his family, told stories of his youth in Aspen. He never pressured for more than I was ready to give, respecting my space and my time of healing. In mid-2004, almost a year after Benjamin's death, I participated in a collective crafts exhibition in Aspen. Among my pieces was a sculpture I had worked on for months, a tree with deep roots and branches that extended upward, each one supporting a small bird in different stages of flight. I called it New Beginnings. To my surprise, the piece was acquired by a collector from Denver, who commissioned more works from me. Soon, other commissions began to come in. Olga encouraged me to open my own workshop, and August offered help to equip it. "You have a gift, Ethel," he told me. "A gift that was born from pain, but which can now bring beauty to the world." It was August who accompanied me when I returned to Lexington for the first time to retrieve the rest of my things. The house seemed smaller, quieter than I remembered. I walked through each room, saying goodbye to the memories that lived there. In the room that had been Benjamin's, I knelt and prayed for his soul, asking that he find the peace he couldn't find in life. That night, sitting on the porch of the house that had been my home for so many years, I told August the whole story, the dream of motherhood frustrated by endometriosis, Benjamin's adoption, the happy years, the deterioration of the relationship, James's death, the threats, the prison, the tragic end. He listened in silence, holding my hand when tears prevented me from continuing. "You did what you could, Ethel," he said when I finished. "Some people carry wounds so deep that not all the love in the world can heal them." The next day, I put the house up for sale. It was time to definitively turn the page. With the money from the sale, I bought a small house in Aspen, near Marion, and not far from August's workshop. I transformed the garage into a studio and began giving sculpture classes to children from the local community. My relationship with August grew slowly, with the respect of two people who had known love and loss. It wasn't an overwhelming passion like what I felt for James in my youth, but a deep companionship, a safe harbor after the storm. In 2005, we decided to unite our lives in a simple ceremony with only family and close friends. I never imagined I would find love again at this stage of life, I confessed to him on the night of our wedding. August smiled, running his fingers through my almost completely white hair. "Life has these gifts stored for us, Ethel. We just need to be open to receive them." And so, at 53, when many think that life has already shown everything it had to offer, I discovered that there is always a possibility of a new beginning. From the ashes of tragedy, a new Ethel was born, stronger, wiser, more compassionate, a woman who learned in the hardest way that we cannot control what life brings us, only how we respond to it. Art became my voice, my therapy, my connection to the world. Through wood, I transformed pain into beauty, despair into hope. Each sculpture I created was a testimony that it is possible to survive the worst that life can offer and still find reasons to smile, to create, to love. "The hands that carve also heal," Olga used to say, and she was right. By giving shape to raw wood, I gave new shape to my own existence. Today, at 73, my life in Aspen is peaceful and rewarding in a way that I never imagined possible after everything I lived through. Our little house is on a tree-lined street in the Meadow Valley neighborhood, with a garden full of blue hydrangeas that remind me of my first days here, when the healing process was just beginning. August and I have shared 20 years of companionship, respect, and affection. He's 81 now, a bit slower in his movements, but with the same passion for wood and craftsmanship that united us. Every morning, we have coffee together on the porch, watching the birds that come to eat the seeds we leave in the feeder. Afterward, each goes to their corner of the studio we built at the back of the property, a spacious wooden structure with large windows that let in natural light, perfect for our work. My sister Marion lives just 2 blocks away. At 75, she remains active in the community, coordinating a group of artisans who sell their work to tourists. We gather every Wednesday for an afternoon tea that has become a tradition. I bring my cheese biscuits, a recipe I learned from a neighbor from Georgia, and she prepares her famous apple strudel, a heritage from the German colonization in the region. My brothers, Edward and Isaac, still live in Lexington, but visit us regularly, especially during the Christmas Lights Festival, when Aspen transforms into a fairy tale setting with its decorations and shows. During these family gatherings, the painful memories of the past are rarely mentioned. We prefer to focus on the good memories, the funny stories from our childhood among the cornfields, the mischief we got up to at school. My studio has become my little sanctuary. Over time, I've developed my own style of sculpture, combining traditional techniques of the Southern carvers with elements of nature from the mountain region. My best-known pieces are the Forest Guardians, figures carved in pine that represent protective spirits inspired by local folklore. Each one is unique, with its own personality, and carries a message of hope and renewal. 5 years ago, I was invited to exhibit my work at the Artisan's House, a prestigious space in downtown Aspen. To my surprise, the sculptures had a warm reception, and today I maintain a small but loyal clientele, which includes collectors of folk art and tourists seeking authentic souvenirs of the region. Beyond the artistic work, I dedicate 2 mornings a week to a project that brings me immense joy: carving workshops for children in vulnerable situations. The project started modestly, with just 3 students, but today we serve more than 20 children between 10 and 15 years old. I teach them not just techniques for working with wood, but values like patience, persistence, and the ability to see beauty where others see only a piece of raw material. Life is like wood, I often tell them. Sometimes it seems hard and inflexible, but with the right tools and a lot of patience, we can transform it into something beautiful. In these young people, especially in the most withdrawn and marked by difficult stories, I see a bit of what Benjamin could have been if he had found in time a way to channel his emotions, to transform pain into creation. I cannot change the past, but I can use what I learned to, perhaps, help change the future of other children. On the coldest days of the mountain winter, when the fog descends over Aspen like a white mantle, August lights the stone fireplace that he built himself, and we spend the afternoons reading, drawing new projects, or simply talking. Sometimes we sit in silence, just appreciating each other's presence, a luxury that only mature relationships know. Our nights are peaceful. We have dinner early, usually something simple and homemade, a chicken soup on colder days, or cornbread with tomato sauce and basil harvested from our own garden. Afterward, we watch the local news or some old movie. August has a predilection for classic Italian cinema, which reminds me of the stories my father used to tell about the land of his ancestors. Some nights, when insomnia visits, a more frequent companion with advancing age, I get up without waking August and go to the studio. In the silence of the early hours, with only the occasional noise of some nocturnal animal outside, I work on special pieces, those that are not for sale, but to process emotions that even after so many years sometimes still emerge like bubbles from a deep lake. One of these pieces occupies a special place in our living room, a sculpture that represents a family, a man, a woman, and a small boy holding hands, forming a circle. It is my tribute to the family I had, to the happy years with James and Benjamin before life took unexpected turns. It is not a denial of the suffering that came after, but an acknowledgement that there was love and joy too, and that these memories deserve to be preserved. Time has brought, if not forgetfulness, at least a deeper understanding. Today, I understand that Benjamin carried wounds that preceded our family, traumas of abandonment and loss that perhaps were too great to be healed just with love and goodwill. I also understand that James, in his desire to be a good father, ended up not being able to establish the boundaries that our son needed. And I, in my rigidity and fear, perhaps did not know how to find the balance. We did the best we could with what we knew at the time, Olga once told me, and this phrase has become a mantra that I repeat in moments when guilt tries to resurface. Our routine includes morning walks through historic downtown Aspen, where we greet merchants and neighbors who have already become friends over the years. On Sundays, we attend Mass at St. Peter's Church, a stone and wood construction that resembles the churches of Italy. Faith, which has always been important in my life, has gained new contours with the experiences I've lived through. Less dogmatic, more centered on gratitude and love for others. Once a month, we host for Sunday lunch what we affectionately call our expanded family. Besides Marion, my nephews come with their children and even grandchildren, close friends like Olga, now almost 90, but still lucid and witty, and some of the first students from my workshops, now adults with their own families. On these occasions, the house fills with voices and laughter. The smell of barbecue and peach cobbler fills the air, and I feel a deep gratitude for the community we've built. I live today in Aspen, but Lexington remains an important part of my identity. Occasionally, August and I make a visit to the city where I was born and spent most of my life. We visit the cemetery where James and Benjamin are buried, bring flowers, say a prayer. These are not visits laden with sadness, but of reconciliation with the past, of acknowledgement that those losses, however painful they were, are part of my story. And so I weave the days of this phase of life, with the serenity of someone who survived the storm and now appreciates the calm. I don't know how much more time I'll have, nobody knows. But each morning I wake up and see August's face beside me. Each afternoon I work with my wrinkled hands transforming wood. Each night I fall asleep in peace is a gift that I don't take for granted. Life, I've learned, is made of cycles, like the seasons that transform the mountain landscape throughout the year. There was the harsh winter of loss, yes. But then came the spring of new beginnings, the summer of fulfillment, and now this peaceful autumn with its soft colors and its silent wisdom. Looking back, I see that the journey, with all its pains and joys, brought me exactly where I needed to be. My dear friends, coming to the end of this story that I've shared with you, I want to leave some words that were born not from books or borrowed wisdom, but from the scars that life left on my heart and the healing that, with time and much inner work, I managed to find. I learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our capacity to begin anew each day. In my early 50s, when many think that life has already shown everything it had to offer, I discovered a new purpose, a new love, a new way of existing in the world. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. When I look in the mirror today, I see a woman who fell and got up countless times, who knew the worst of life and still chose to believe in the best of people. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never completely goes out. It was that small flame of hope that guided me out of the labyrinth of suffering, even when everything seemed lost. I never allowed my dignity to be stolen, even when they tried to take everything from me. I chose courage, even while trembling, because I understood that fear only has power when it paralyzes us. I discovered that we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take it anymore. It's precisely when we think we've reached our limit that we discover there's a reservoir of strength inside us that we didn't even know existed. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. The scars remain, but they stop hurting with each new dawn that we embrace with gratitude. My story isn't about what was done to me, but about how I chose to respond. I could have drowned in bitterness, but I chose to swim to the shore even when the current seemed too strong. I learned that true strength isn't in never falling, but in getting up every time, and that there's no shame in accepting an outstretched hand. Angels often appear disguised as ordinary people who cross our path at exactly the right moment. Age has given me wisdom to understand that it's never too late to start over. Each day is a blank page, a new opportunity to write a different story, no matter how many years we have. My experience has taught me that our story doesn't end with painful chapters. There's always an after waiting to be written. There's always light after the densest darkness. I learned that surviving is a form of resistance and living well is the best revenge. Each genuine smile, each moment of peace, each work I create with my hands is a victory over the suffering that once threatened to consume me. In the wood I work with every day, I see a profound lesson about life. Even the hardest knots, the most difficult parts to carve, can be transformed into the most beautiful details of the final piece. Our difficulties, when worked with patience and love, become our strength and our unique beauty. If today your life seems like a piece of raw wood, full of imperfections and difficult areas, remember, in the right hands, with the right tools and the necessary time, it can be transformed into a work of art. You are that work in progress, my dear. Oh, my beloved friends who have accompanied me this far, with this grandma who has lived so much. If anything I've told today touched your heart, made you smile, or perhaps even shed a little tear, I would be so happy if you would subscribe to this channel. It's just a little click, but for this grandma here, it means the whole world. And that little bell, you know? If you could activate it, it will notify you when I come to tell you another story, warm like bread coming out of the oven. Wouldn't it be wonderful for us to continue this conversation? If you want to give me an even more special gift, share this video with someone you love. Who knows if my story can't warm another heart, bring a little hope to someone who needs it. And for me to know that you really accompanied me to the end, to the very end of my story, leave in the comments the word Ethel. Just that, this little word that carries my name, my story, my journey. When I read it, I'll know it was you who held my hand throughout this path of memories. Thank you for listening to me with such affection. May God bless each one of you, and may life, with all its surprises, bring more light than shadows on your path. With all my heart, Ethel.